personal take on what we're going to be talking about today. It's an absolutely vital part of the climate agenda, how we take early, anticipatory action before a hazard becomes a disaster. Now, we all know that crises are increasingly multidimensional, that you get many at the same time. Many countries are facing multiple threats that come together. Many of them are recurrent. Hurricanes are a classic example of that. They have a season. We know roughly when they're going to come each year in different parts of the world, even if we don't know the exact timing or the exact ferocity. It's also, I think, climate change, what might be called the ultimate threat multiplier. With it come other problems. It can be a cause of conflict, a cause of disease, food insecurity, famine, migration, forced displacement. And it's the poorest who are often hit hardest when these impacts come together. So, you all know the stats, but 200 million is the number of people in need of humanitarian assistance in the future that we predict, compared to 108 million today. That's what the future holds for us if we don't do a better job of preparing for climate change and its impacts. Nevertheless, as we look at those numbers, I think there are reasons for hope. I think the kind of conversations that we're having, the kind of way in which we can actually forecast better, how we can predict better what might happen, and therefore take action, both looking at individual risks around hurricanes, for example, but also around trends. If we know that the impact of hurricanes is going up season by season, then we will think about investments in preparation in a different way. So analysis, data, trends can help us and can make us better in future. That means that loss of life, loss of livelihood and other impacts, again, most usually on the very poorest, aren't inevitable. It means that we can step up our early warning systems. It means we can do a better job of preparing and making sure that action is taken so that communities and individuals have the best chance of being ready and prepared for extreme weather events. Where risk is better informed, early action is better informed. It means that the money we do have, resource that's often scarce in many parts of the world, can be invested in the things that will make the biggest difference. We can have pre-arranged finance plans. We can have pre-arranged crisis response mechanisms. That means that lives are saved, livelihoods are saved, and things can return to normal more rapidly than they have in the past, even if at the moment there is less we can do about the actual events themselves. So, for us, for the UK, we want to show leadership in this area. We want to make sure that international systems adjust, that we are more proactive and less reactive, that we're more anticipatory. But we need our collaborations. We need to work with all of you, both here this afternoon, of all of you around the international system, whether that's countries, UN agencies, other parts of the forest, whether it's governments, civil society, private sector. All of us are going to have to do a better job of coming together to prepare for the worst events, the worst things that climate throws at us. So that's precisely why the Risk-Informed Early Action Partnership, or REAP, was launched in 2019. It's why the UK is a very strong supporter of that. It provides targets, which are important. It allows us to measure whether we're making progress. It provides ambition, it provides ambition and vision, which again is key to mobilisation. And it provides a really useful platform, as we're seeing this afternoon, to convene, to coordinate, to bring partners together. Today we're going to hear from some of those key partners. I hope we're going to start to answer the question, what does early action really look like in practice? What will it take to really achieve a systemic shift in this area? How do we move from pilot projects, which I think have demonstrated that action in this area does work, to programs that mean that we are taking risk-informed early action in a broader way to really help the 1 billion most at risk from climate change and disaster around the world. I think the partnership's growing. I think we are making progress, but there's loads more to do. So I'm really delighted that so many of you joined us. Thank you in particular from our distinguished panellists, Minister Nancy Tembo from Malawi, Special Envoy Abul Kalam Azad from Bangladesh, who will be joining us, I hope, shortly for the second half of this session, the Secretary-General of the Kenya Red Cross, Dr. Asha Mohammed, and to Mami Mizuturi, the SRSG from UNDRR, all moderated by the great Lisa Robinson from BBC Media Action. So thank you very much to all of you for devoting some time this afternoon to joining us. Before we do that, and before we go into the panel's remarks and the Q&A, I'd like to introduce a short video created with the support of REAP, which will show us a little bit about what the future could look like. Thank you very much, everybody.
Tropical storms,
floods,
landslides,
extreme heat,
droughts,
extreme cold,
wildfires.
These are the extreme weather events
And impacts of climate change we are already experiencing. We will need to deal with them more frequently in the years to come.
They steal life.
They destroy livelihoods.
They separate families.
They decimate economies.
and yet,
And yet, we are better equipped to face these events today
than we have ever been.
better climate information and weather forecasting services,
Access to Earth observations, satellite imagery, and artificial intelligence.
Stronger early warning systems.
stronger risk modeling and data analytics.
Pre-arrange financial resources and instruments.
Teams ready to deploy in anticipation of the hazards.
social media platforms that can reach millions of people with critical information.
The ability to improve warning system through community feedback.
Comprehensive plans, policies, and legal frameworks.
Empower decision makers with the information they need when they need it.
truly people-centered and inclusive approaches adopted by all.
we no longer have to wait until the hazard strikes.
And the disaster unfolds.
We no longer have to react after the fact.
Now we can take action ahead of the hazard's impact.
Now we can invest in proactive risk management. This is the future.
This is what risk-informed early action at scale looks like.
Families are evacuated ahead of the storm.
Roofs are tied down before the wind picks up.
Cash is distributed before the floods arrive. Animal fodder is pre-positioned before the snow falls.
The most vulnerable are identified and supported in their hour of need.
We have already started to see the benefits of these approaches.
More lives have been protected.
More livelihoods have been safeguarded.
More development gains have been assured.
Less recovery is required.
Less money has to be spent on response.
And more dignity for those in the path of hazards. Now it is the time to make this future a reality.
Now is the time to get ahead of the climate curve.
Together,
Together, let's take early action.
Together.
Let's make early action the norm.
That's great. Let's make early action the norm. That is the theme of today's event. And welcome to 2025, where early action is the default. So I'd like to, first, I'm Lisa Robinson. I work with BBC Media Action, and that's the BBC's international development charity. And we are one of the 58 members of the Risk-Informed Early Action Partnership, or REAP, which brings us together today. As mentioned by Sir Philip, REAP was conceived at the UN Climate Action Summit in 2019 and seeks to bring together the climate, development and humanitarian sectors. And it joins partners across government, civil society, the private sector and international organizations around those 4 targets, and we'll explore those targets throughout this session. But right now, what we're going to do is project ourselves into 2025. I want you to imagine what the world would look like once early action is the default. And to get those juices flowing, what we're going to do is have you write some headlines and tweet them to right here, #2025. Write the headlines that you want to see. Stop complaining about the news and just write the headlines that you want to see in the media in 2025. Now, ideally, headlines would be jargon-free, but today you can write whatever you want. My personal vision for 2025 is closer collaboration between technical experts like many of you and the local media to communicate risk better, but we'll work on that. So for now, just get your headlines in there to #welcome to 2025 to describe that vision of the world in the future. The thing is, though, is that vision of the future isn't just an imagination. Right now, we do have some really fantastic examples of early action in practice, and we have our distinguished panel to tell us about some of those. These are our real champions around early action. So we're going to turn to them, members of the REAP partnership, and hear about their experiences and learn from what they're doing right now on early action. First, we're going to turn to Honourable Minister Nancy Tembo, who has been a Member of Parliament since 2004 and is now serving as the Minister for Forestry and Natural Resources in Malawi. She assumes the chairmanship of the Southern Africa Development Community, SADC, Cluster on Environment, Natural Resources and Tourism, as Malawi becomes the chair of SADC in August 2021. All right. Minister Tembo, as you know, one of the key components for scaling up early action is greater investment in infrastructure and technology and institutions that expand early action in last mile communities. Some might call those first mile communities. And there continues to be gaps between increased investments in early warning and the infrastructure and ability of those systems to reach the people most affected. And furthermore, we need to ensure that early warnings are people-centered so that they translate into early action amongst those communities. Now, Minister, before I come to you, we have a short video to watch. And this is from REAP partners UNDP and GCF that helps to explain how some of this work is being carried out in Malawi.
Komatsuka dangopeza kuti mudzi wonse uli mbembembe madzi kazi bambo ena ndena amalayi tetenga amene matitenga amene tidalipo ndikumatipiritsa ku fisidi uko anapangako ulimi wothirira ndi anakumba damu anakhangata kweza mudzimo ndeife pano makatisiya pati pamene popo kuti tizikhala amenepo ndi pamene timakhala ife ana anga ena akuluakulu anadzakwera mmwamba ndi anthu ena ndi ena mitengo yaikuluikulu ena azimayi ena adatikweza pamwamba pa fisidiyo chifukwa ndife afupi so kunali kungothatha kuti nanga tipanga bwanji. Iyi ndi nyumba yanga inali makhala pano ine koma yonse inatha ndi madzi ndipo zitavura zitatani singabwereso kunayi bora kungokhala mtunda umwe wakhala pachikwera tipumutsa miyoyo yathu pamodzi ndi miyoyo ya ana.
Flooding is one of the biggest, hazards we have to deal with. And early warning information is then key in order to, one, reduce the numbers of people that may be affected, but also reduce the loss of lives. If people can be informed about an impending flood before it strikes, they can take, a number of actions that will reduce their vulnerability. So we have, through the Green Climate Fund project, invested a lot in equipment for the 2 technical departments that produce early warning information and climate information.
Next steps will still maybe have to work on almost the same issues, mainly the communication and dissemination of information, as well as the capacity to understand and interpret the information, especially for the rural masses, the farmers, the fishers.
Zimene zamayi zikonza kutithandiza kwambiri kuona kuti tikonza kukhala ndi information yabwino ne kuti panyanja sipali bwino tiyeti pangeze peti salowe zikonza kutitetezesa kuti siononga ndalama zathu kugula mafuta tikonza kuti panyanja.
All right. Fantastic example there. Minister Tembo, can you please set the scene for us? How is climate changing in Malawi, and what do you foresee in terms of extreme weather events in the years to come?
Well, thank you very much for having me this afternoon, and pleased to be here. I think the clip that we just watched is self-explanatory as to what happens. We have recently, with the help of GCF, but also the British government, invested in early warning systems. But we still need more to do more in that area. As you can see, livelihoods are destroyed, homes are destroyed, assets are destroyed. And what that does, it brings more poverty, it brings more abuse, it destroys livelihoods, farmlands are destroyed, crops are destroyed, lives are lost. So there is need for us as governments to invest more in early warning systems. And what we have done so far in Malawi is to ensure that messages get to the people as soon as possible. And every week, the Department of Meteorological Services does issue out statements. And I think with time and with more investment in technology, these are now proving to be more and more reliable. And because they're more and more reliable, people now have more trust in them. And so if there's going to be heavy rains, people do prepare on time. Government departments do mobilize to prepare on time. And the way we have disseminated this information is through village committees, through radio programming, through messaging, through SMS messages, through mobile phones. So we now have more instruments to convey these messages to the people. And as government departments, there's more coordination as well between the Department of Disaster Preparedness, the Department of Water, all the departments, the critical departments that participate whenever disaster strikes. So there is more now happening by way of early action, early response to the needs of the people that are affected. Like you saw there, now people are more aware because of they know the information that is conveyed, where to construct homes and where not to construct homes, where to grow crops and where not to grow crops. All this as a result of the early warning systems that have been put in place. But we need to prepare more because extreme climate events are there, like as we speak. Last week in my country, the weathers were just so the temperatures were just so high. Something that you do not see during this time of the year in certain areas. So people are now expecting extreme weathers, and so we are trying to build infrastructure that can withstand these extreme pressures. We are now building dikes. There is more harvesting, water harvesting that is being done in order to gather all this water that sometimes will cause floods. But if we harvest this water, then we can now use it profitably for the benefit of the community. So I think we need early warning systems, and the more we invest in that, the better, more technology to help us. But at the moment, I think we are headed in the right direction because of the awareness that's there. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We'll now turn to, hello, Abul Kalam Assad. Thank you for joining, and thank you for bringing a bit of gender balance to the panel. We needed that. You're the Special Envoy of the Climate Vulnerable Forum under the presidency of the Government of Bangladesh. And you're also responsible for leading Sustainable Development Goal planning and implementation in Bangladesh. And Mr. Assad, I'm sure you'll agree that to be effective, anticipatory action requires money, requires funding. It requires funding that can be accessed ahead of an emergency. And without pre-agreed planning and financing arrangements, early warnings cannot translate easily into early action. And this is why climate and disaster risk finance and insurance solutions are so important to provide rapid liquidity when disasters occur. Before I ask you a question, Mr. Assad, let's watch another short video about how anticipatory action has already supported communities in Bangladesh.
টেহা পাইছি টেহা দে চাইল আনছি আলু আনছি ডাইল আনছি লবণ মরিচ আনছি পোলাহানের খাবার দাবার আনছি
আমার সুবিধা হইল একটু আমার সংসারের দিকে আয় পেলাম এখন বর্ষার মাস তো আমার চাউল ডাউল কিনে চলা হয় আর কি
маань их цагаан асан төсөл байлаа. Одоо хээлтэй мадын их мадын хээл томорсон үед ирсэн учраас одоо их мадыг эрт хийжсэн учраас ингэж мал одоо сайхан жилдтэй төлж байна.
Хэдэн малаа ондруулахын тулд одоо зээл авчаад одоо өөрсдөө зээл авна. Энэ төсөл хамрагдсанаар манайх одоо энэ жил ерөөсөн банкнаас зээл авах хэдэн малаа ондмонд оруулсан.
Ганц гоё юм малаа ондруулчаад ирэх хэрэгтэй.
Ондруулчаад
эргээд компьютер авч байгаа нь асууж гоё.
All right. Mr. Assad, the video was showing flooding from last year, but Bangladesh has faced cyclones and floods for decades. And I think we've all noticed that over the past several years, Bangladesh has really managed to radically reduce their impact on people's lives and livelihoods. Can you tell us how Bangladesh has managed to improve preparedness and how early action is mitigating the impact of those severe events?
Thank you. Thank you very much. Not balancing, but participating together. Together, each achieve more. I believe we will be achieving more. The success story I would tell in Bangladesh. Amphan last year we faced. And we faced 5 big floods in a year. Believe me, 5 big floods in a year and Cyclone Amphan. This Cyclone Amphan, it had the magnitude of Cyclone Vola, which was in 1970, and that cost 1 million lives. And Cyclone Amphan cost a little bit higher than 100. So we understand that one life is very precious. But you see, from 1 million to 100, this is the proof of the preparedness of Bangladesh, using good practices in all the area. As Madam was mentioning about the early warning system, using different digital devices. And also door to door, we have about 100,000 volunteers. So these volunteers, as and when the warning comes, then quickly they move door to door. Because sometimes the rural people, they think that, okay, I will move when cyclone comes, but they don't get time. So these volunteer, and the system in our country, in the meantime, government developed so many guidelines, laws, regulations, so that one types of natural calamity happens, if it is flood, if it is a cyclone, if it is river erosion, then different types of guideline already prepared, and our different relevant ministry, they take the preparation before the disaster, during the disaster, and after the disaster. These 3 types of specific, all the ministries, all the agencies have their specific responsibility. I believe this led us having 1 million to 100. In terms of financing, especially the video which it shows, that, okay, if we can provide resources, keeping in mind that the disaster is coming, so that they can be prepared fully, and with less resources, they can do more. And this is proved in last few years by intervention of different development partners. And now also government is working for that, so that not only the early warning system, but early preparedness for them, so that they can face the natural calamities and disaster in time and reduce their losses. Thank you.
Thank you. You mentioned 100,000 volunteers, and we have Dr. Asha Mohammed, who is the Secretary General of the Kenya Red Cross Society, an organization built on volunteers. You have over 25 years of diverse experience working with humanitarian and government institutions. And another important component of successful early action is the expansion of early warning systems and risk communication, so that users can understand alerts and make informed decisions. And that reminds me of the fellow in the film earlier who was talking about whether to get into his boat or not, whether to spend that fuel and keep his life safe. So decisions both big and small. This requires multi-sectoral coordination and the dissemination of appropriate early warnings and impact-based forecasting. And these all need to be tied to clear early action protocols at the local level. And you know it's coming. Before we talk about the Red Cross's experience in Kenya, Dr. Mohammed let us watch another short video about community-based communication. Next.
we needed to put the focus in a format that was more useful for them and that they would appreciate. We finally came up with icons, and so that's what we currently use today.
The Daraja project has helped my community in various ways. Now people are more keen on the weather forecast. They want to know how the weather is going to be so that they can plan their daily activities. So it has helped us a lot.
Dr. Mohammed, the Kenya Red Cross plays a key role nationally in both preparing for and responding to disasters. Can you tell us practically how the organization has become more anticipatory and less reactive?
Thank you very much. And I think maybe just to start by saying that it's clear and there's no more debate or discussion about what we expect to see in the future, and the Honorable Minister started with that, because Kenya, I think, is one country that can clearly say that, yes, over time, we have seen that we are getting, more frequent disasters, and not just frequent, but also the severity of the impacts. We have more people getting affected. Just to give an example, last year we had a desert locust invasion, which apparently is coming back again in the next few weeks, something that we had not seen in 70 years for those who were there before us. So you can imagine, the kind of issues that we have to deal with. Floods, drought. As we sit here today, we have a serious drought in the country where more than 2 million people are affected. As the Red Cross, primarily being a disaster response organization, of course, we've been responding to a lot of these emergencies, but it's also been very clear to us that we cannot continue in this same way because, one, it is not going to help communities to be able even to recover, because even the time frame between one disaster to another doesn't even allow them to actually recover. And so it means that we need to look more at prevention. As an organization as well, it was clear that we will never get enough resources to be able to respond to these disasters as they happen, because of course the magnitude has increased. But again, too many deaths, too many injuries really is one too many. So a conscious decision, even as an organization, to say that we need to prevent. And when we cannot prevent, because we know a lot of this also is also natural, sometimes, of course, we can talk about the hand we've had in it in making it happen. But it's about saying, okay, what if it happens? How do we ensure that we can save people and we can actually ensure that they can recover better? So the first thing I would say is that working again with other stakeholders, government included, the Kenya Red Cross then has been working with different partners, the meteorological department in particular, where we have a memorandum of understanding with them in terms of using forecasts, and we get this information on a regular basis. So as an organization, we use this information to actually ensure that it reaches to communities for them to be able to also take action. But it's not enough just to share this information from the forecast, but it's also about preparing communities and giving them the capacity to be able to use this information for action. And we've seen in the past, even when the meteorological department would put out some of this information, for example, say, well, it's going to flood, can you move to higher grounds? And people would not move. But I think with time, involving communities in this whole process and building their capacity to be able to interpret and to understand what needs to be done, then we see a lot of acceptance and change towards that. As an organization ourselves, we also decided that as a responder, it means that we also need to look at our own capacity. How are we able to respond effectively if something happens? So looking at how to build capacity of our own staff and volunteers, and as you mentioned, yes, our strength is our volunteer base as the Red Cross, Red Crescent movement. Kenya Red Cross alone, we have 217,000 volunteers in Kenya. And these are people who are living within these communities. So they are able to support the communities to be able to react. Issues of even stockpiling. We know when some of these disasters happen, we will have displacement. So do we have enough materials to be able to support communities? So we have designed a system where we have 8 hubs in the country, where we have warehouses, and we are able to, once it is clear what the forecast is and to anticipate, we are able to stockpile and ensure that for those communities that will be affected by whatever hazard, we have enough materials closer to the communities for a faster reaction. But maybe also just to say, we've also taken the concept of using technology to try and also innovate and improve on our action. For example, we have what we call iVolunteers. So, volunteers who do not have to be physically present and coming to the Red Cross, but volunteers who, when they see some of the warning signs in the community, all they need to do is to send a quick message to the Red Cross to say, this is what we are seeing at community level, and therefore some kind of trigger actually can happen. But maybe I would just like to say that, yes, good steps, but of course with challenges. For example, we've all been talking about the financing question. Important to put all these systems in place, but the action requires some resource. So without that in place, you can imagine the difficulty. When you ask a community to move away from a riverbank to another location, they have left everything behind in terms of their homes and other necessities. So what do they use when they go to the other place? It requires money to actually set this up. But more importantly for us, what we've also seen is that the duration that people are taking when they move is increasing. Before, we had situations where they would move and they would be able to go back to their original homes. Today, we have communities that were affected by floods in 2019, and they are still displaced because the lakes are having backflows, even without the rain. It means that land is not habitable anymore. So what happens to this kind of communities? It means that even in financing early action, we need to look at more sustainable support and integrating recovery so that very early on, as we are acting, we are already looking at the recovery actions that these communities would need. So maybe just briefly to say, yes, those are some of the maybe tangible and practical interventions that we have put in place just to ensure that we are able to respond better, but more importantly, we are able to save lives. Thank you.
Thank you. Some really, really powerful stories there. Mami, Ms. Utori, is the Special Representative of the Secretary General for Disaster Risk Reduction. And she heads the United Nations Office for Disaster Risk Reduction. And you're well positioned to know that early action requires countries to better connect to disaster risk management and climate change adaptation in national development planning. And the REAP initiative was set up in part to strengthen links across policy work and to effectively support governments to integrate them into national, local, legal and policy frameworks. And before I ask you to share some of the experiences from you in DRR, let's watch a short video. This was on key steps for developing national strategies in DRR. the audio on that was just nature sounds. What a different approach. We're not used to hearing silence in nature sounds in videos. Fantastic, thank you.
Well, thank you, Lisa, but I'm sure everybody was thinking, what a boring video compared to the other three, right? Because it wasn't dramatic nor sensational, but I'll get to that. But really, early warning saves lives. That's true. All the UN member states, they submit to our organization, UN Office for Disaster Risk Reduction, data around mortality, affected people, economic loss, and disruption to infrastructure from disasters. And this is not only climate disaster, but all sorts of disaster. And the evidence is there. Lives, mortality is going down because of early warning system. However, COVID has put it up again, right? So early warning, early action has been working, and that's why we're very proud to be a member of REAP. But in order to make early warning and early action better, there are several things we need to do. First, it has to be multi-hazard. Climate is really affecting us. This is the biggest risk driver. But we also need to put in the geophysical hazards. We need to put in the biological hazards that lead to epidemics and pandemics. So early warning system, to be better, it needs to be multi-hazard. Early warning system has to be impact-based. What does it mean? It cannot be saying the wind is going to be this strong. It has to be saying the wind is this strong, so if you do not evacuate, this will happen to you. Impact-based early warning. And then the third thing I would say is that it needs to look at where are the vulnerable spots in the country or the region where the early warning system is, because people react differently or can only react differently to early warning system depending on their physical condition, depending on their family structure, whatever. So the early warning system has to be designed looking at the vulnerabilities of the region, country it's covering. And fourth, it has to be cross-boundary, because disasters do not respect boundaries, right? A flood, a heat wave, epidemic, pandemic especially, as we know, they do not stop where the border stops. So the early warning system has to cover all that. And one other thing going into disaster risk reduction that I wanted to mention is, so a lot of times we use the word natural disaster, but we run a campaign which is, there is no such thing as a natural disaster. Why? Because disaster is a combination of the hazard, so the climate risk, the vulnerability, and the exposure. And if you think about it, if a mighty hurricane just sweeps over a no man's land, that is not a disaster. That is just a big hazard. Nobody has died. No buildings have been fallen. And so there is no such thing as a natural disaster. It becomes a disaster when we have failed in the short term and the long term to mitigate the vulnerability exposure of our society or country. And this is where disaster risk reduction kicks in when it comes to early warning system, because climate risk, climate data goes into early warning system definitely. Yeah, it tells us what historically this wind, this typhoon has done, and with global warming becoming an emergency, it will tell us what it will happen in the future. But we also need to understand, as I said, the vulnerabilities and the exposure. And in order to mitigate this, you need what you saw, the 10 steps. You need a good risk governance. You need an institution in your country, in your town, which is in charge of, as Dr. Mohammed said, reducing the risk and preventing better. You need finance to be put in there, finance for prevention, which many governments don't put in. On average, national budget, only 1% of the money goes into prevention. All the rest around disaster goes into response and recovery and reconstruction. We are just continuing the cycle, right? It's getting better, but we're not there yet as the Honorable Minister said. And so we need to look at having a risk governance, a very good one. We need to look at what are the risk drivers, the really deep risk drivers, the root causes. It's poverty, it's around informal urbanization, it's around degradation of land. And if you cannot, although it sounds too challenging, if you cannot look at all these disaster risks together, you cannot prevent more lives to be saved or more livelihoods to be saved or more economy to be saved. So that is what we mean when we say climate action, climate adaptation, mitigation needs to be combined with disaster risk reduction in order to have an impact. And that's our work. We work very closely with UNFCCC. We have just launched a center for climate and disaster resilience with World Meteorological Organization because we believe that this has to come together. And I think there are more and more countries, more and more cities, more and more individuals who are believing in this. So that's what I mean, and that will only make the early warning, early action system better.
Thank you. We've got some follow-up questions for each of the panelists, and Ms. Misutori, you have the first one here. Given current trends and challenges that you just described, where would you like to see the international community in 5 years' time?
I would like to see that we are preventing better, as Dr. Mohammed said, and many others were mentioning, because we keep on talking about the intensity, frequency of the climate emergency. We are now in the middle of the pandemic. And by the way, this pandemic was foreseen in 2015 when the Sendai Framework for Disaster Risk Reduction was adopted. The countries that had experienced Ebola, MERS, and SARS said the next big disaster can be pandemic and epidemic. So we are going to put in biological hazard into the Sendai Framework. It was put in, but governments did not put that in their national strategies that I mentioned. Once the pandemic started, we looked at how many governments had put in this biological hazard into their strategy, not many. So this is where we are, and we cannot be in this 5 years from now. We need to put prevention front and center. We need to have policies around prevention, and we need to put money, financing into prevention.
Thank you. Minister Tembo, we heard in the GCF video about investments in early warning systems and in infrastructure and technology in Malawi. How, in practice, do you bring expertise from different government departments to tackle the challenges and ensure a comprehensive approach is taken?
Yeah, disasters have been with us for a long time, and so we've had time to improve on what has been done in the past. What we have between departments is a committee that every year will prepare ahead of time, try and source funding to be able to anticipate, to finance what they anticipate could be a disaster. And the challenge, of course, has been that it's never adequate. But we work with the Red Cross, a part of that committee, and various other civil society organizations. I think the challenge still remains that because of the resource envelopes challenges, we always are reactionary oftentimes, even though we are aware. There's so much that we do, but oftentimes we're not able to do the best because of the challenges in financing. But what is important, I think, is that now we're able to prepare ahead of time and to prevent. I would just like to, the point that was made by the Secretary General of Kenya, that you can have all the early warning that you need, but if you do not engage the communities, nothing is going to happen. And that has happened in my country, where people are told, please move please move. And nobody moves, nobody budges until the disaster hits. So the engagement of the community is important. Have all the framework in place, but most of all engage the local leadership, the local authority, so that the people are able to understand what they're trying to achieve. Mind you, people move from areas where their schools go to school. That's where their hospital is. That's where the place of worship is, to a place where there is nothing. And people are always reluctant to do that. So that engagement is critical to move. And governments such as ours need to invest more. Now that we have these early warning systems, they are helping, and we need more investment and more innovation as well, because I don't think we are there yet. And the issues of climate change have affected the way we respond, deforestation. For example, in the lower part of Malawi, in the Shire Valley, the challenge is flooding caused by landscape degradation. So now we have programs to ensure that we replenish those landscapes to prevent the flooding. So all these things are interrelated. The rapidly growing population, a 4% increase in population. So there's more need for land. People who go and have and cultivate in places where they're not supposed to cultivate, inducing floods. So these things are all interrelated. Climate change, issues of forestation, population issues. All these should be looked at in a more comprehensive manner by governments. Thank you.
Mentioned innovation, and one of the REAP members is the START network, and they're a network of more than 50 humanitarian agencies across 5 continents, and they aim to transform the humanitarian system, transform humanitarian action through innovation and faster funding. And we have a video from the START network.
दुकाल में कहीं कोई नहीं भूख है रुको माल ना भूख ए वस्कार से बदल वस्कारो नहीं है तो दुकाले
असि रोजगार हले तो असां बरसात मथे बरसात नहीं थी पे जा दुकाल आए.
In 2017, START network members began working with Pakistan's disaster authority to help at-risk communities threatened by drought. START network is made up of more than 55 aid agencies across 6 continents, ranging from international organizations to national NGOs.
Drought is a major problem in Pakistan, which is its magnitude is increasing due to climate change. Drought have an impact on the most vulnerable for decades after the immediate crisis has passed. In order to survive, communities sell their valuable assets, a move that can tip them into a spiral of desituation and severe malnutrition.
Since the beginning of October 2020, START network members in Pakistan have been monitoring agricultural drought using cutting-edge technology, together with on-the-ground data across the province of Sindh and Punjab. On 11 June 2021, Concern Worldwide and its local partners, Sami Foundation and Sukkar Foundation, were awarded a total of £300,000 to deliver an anticipatory action drought intervention program. Anticipatory action is highly effective when it is locally led. Pre-agreed plans are put in place with local communities and CSOs that identify the needs and the most appropriate timing of anticipatory action interventions. The project started on the 11th June, ahead of the anticipated crisis peak in the upcoming months.
नवो मनसूबो शुरुआत थियो है पूरे आपरे टाइम ती शुरुआत थई है ए असां नवे नवे सिखियाएं नवा तजुर्बा ता ॾिसी समझता कोनी
ताए कोई भी दुकार साल में या घर जी सब्जी या कोई वगैरह कोई की पूरी करे सघंदा तो ये घट पानी में घट शय में माने असी वधाई कराए असी असां घर जी पूरत करे सघां ता
भाजी थी से वो में से बाड़ा ना खड़ा सा वो में से सेहत सही रहा से दुकाल नसी मुंह दे सघां ता बरसात वसी कोनी असां दुकाल पे गयो वो में असाना ये असाना सुठी मदद करी.
Similar initiatives driven by local and national NGOs are happening around the globe, helping communities to prepare ahead of escalating climate risks. This year, START Network is launching the START Financing Facility, a financial infrastructure that holds pre-arranged funds effectively and efficiently to scale locally led efforts like in Pakistan to get ahead of crisis risks.
Dr. Mohammed, we saw in the video that the importance of local leadership in responses, and it also touched on communication. Based on all of the experience that the Kenyan Red Cross has in this area, what have you learned about how to communicate risk effectively?
Thank you, Lisa. I think from the discussion we just had and the question of involving communities, like I mentioned, sometimes we develop communication strategies that then do not speak to the community, and then of course the uptake is a problem. So I think from the experience we've had is that involving communities and developing strategies that then can be taken up and understood at the local level, whether it means using some of local language. It's about maybe depicting some of the, I think we saw in the video, the using of maybe even some kind of imagery that can communicate what people can understand. Well, in Kenya, many of our communities would probably speak in Swahili. So when you have a communication strategy that is using English in the very rural areas, then of course that's a problem. So I think designing communication strategies that are appropriate for the community, but with their involvement, because they also understand better, and not to ignore the fact that there are also traditional ways that communities have used over time, and they have their own merits, and it's important to ensure that this is also integrated. Like I said, we work very closely with one of the big mobile subscribers called Safaricom, and because a lot of community members have mobile phones, so using even that kind of medium to be able to pass these messages, talk about media, very important. In our case, radio is really extensive in rural communities, and therefore passing some of these messages through local radio in the local language becomes also very effective. So I think it's really about working with all the different stakeholders to ensure that the communication strategies are actually appropriate and can then be able to support the messaging that we need to take on the ground. Thank you.
Thank you. So I like to think of it about, many of you have already said, it's about communicating with communities, not necessarily communicating to communities. So really involving them throughout the process. Right, thank you. Mr. Assad, we've discussed throughout the panel the issue of funding and how difficult it is to find new money. And some are asking if there could be a way to reallocate existing resources. We have another video to watch about one experience from India, and then after this I'd like to know what some of the challenges are to accessing finance in Bangladesh.
Climate change has emerged as a major threat in India. Almost 1/3 of the country is either drought-prone or arid. Mahatma Gandhi National Rural Employment Guarantee Scheme is the world's largest public works-based social protection program. This scheme provides the opportunity to enhance climate resilience of rural poor through a rights-based approach that guarantees 100 days of wage employment to every household and creation of NRM assets. This scheme also has the provision of 50 additional days of employment during drought. Inclusion of climate information in planning and implementation can increase climate risk management potential of the scheme, but lack of understanding and access to climate information posed a challenge. To support climate risk-informed MGN-REGS implementation, Climate Resilience Information System and Planning Tool for MGN-REGS, CRISP-M, has been developed. It's a web and mobile phone-based GIS-aided tool that facilitates integration of climate risk information in planning, implementation, and monitoring of the scheme. It is an amalgamation of bottom-up and top-down approach to collate all relevant information and make it available in a simplified format for usage by the community. CRISP-M has three key components. Drought Early Warning System provides real-time information on drought parameters and impact indicators and analyzes these to monitor and assess drought-like situations. In case of drought prediction, an automatic SMS alert is sent to Mahatma Gandhi and REGS functionaries and community. GIS-assisted asset planning tool integrates GIS information with historical and projected climate data and generates a plan of possible climate resilience strategies, types, and design of assets. The community then modifies the plan based on their local, traditional knowledge and experiences. Community-based planning and monitoring allows remote sensing-based monitoring and crowdsourcing data on MGN-REGS asset and beneficiaries. The CRISP-M tool was piloted in 18 village panchayats of Niwali block in Barwani, Madhya Pradesh.
जैसे मान लो फसल रहती है, अगर ज़्यादा पानी होता ये एप्लीकेशन के माध्यम से हमको पता चल सकता है कि खराब होगी या नहीं।
पहले बारिश होता था तभी कार्य की योजना बनाते थे, अभी तो पूरा ऑनलाइन हो गया है। तो अभी जो नए नए योजना है मनरेगा में, जैसे बोल्डर चेक डैम है, और इससे किसानों को फायदा हो रहा है सिंचाई के लिए।
The pilot conducted in Barwani produced a number of positive results. Feedback from the pilot has been used to further refine the tool, which will be deployed in 2 districts in the next phase of development and then across 7 states in the rollout phase.
All right, so back to the question about financing. There's also a question here about whether Bangladesh has been able to adapt any of the social protection mechanisms to make them more preemptive or anticipatory to shocks.
Thank you. Exactly, the preemptive issues. At present, Bangladesh have about 150 types of social safety net program, having the elderly people, widow, some disadvantaged group of people. So in different way, these social safety net programs are there. Not only looking towards the disaster, but looking towards the capacity building, have their economic development. So in our country, in each of the village, there is an association of 60%, 40 is women, 20 is men. So the program we call My House, My Farm. So each of the house has become a farm in terms of his or her capacity. Maybe Dakari farm, maybe some handicrafts farm, maybe some agriculture, maybe some other. So these 40 women and 20 men having one association, and this program we call the micro savings program, not micro credit. So each of the person, they used to deposit about $2.5 a month, and government put same amount of money, not very big amount, same amount of money in his or her account, and this total fund which they accumulate in a year, government again put another similar amount of money. So this is their fund. They used to allocate loans amongst them for their small income generating activities. I believe this gives immense strength. Now not looking towards the support of the government, but this is my money I am using, so it gives a moral boost up. Now what Bangladesh government is doing, that each year about we spent about $2 billion for this disaster management and all this. At the same time, from the climate vulnerable country, as the president of this CVF, now Bangladesh adopted a plan of climate prosperity plan. Always we used to hear the climate resilience, climate disaster and all this. This time, Prime Minister Sheikh Hasina came forward with the climate prosperity plan, how these challenges, how this can be turned to the opportunity. So we have 6 points in the climate prosperity plan, looking into the disaster preparedness, social safety net, renewable energy, adaptation, and all this. So likewise, about 37 countries of this CVF, they have also showed their interest to have their own climate prosperity plan. We are working for that. I understand that this will lead to the development, a very good networking, and also support to the local level people for their economic development. Thank you.
Thank you. I think we've had some really fantastic examples here, really inspiring, and I hope that they're inspiring you to write those tweets from the future, 2025. You've got those. You've got the hashtag up there. We're coming to a close here in just a minute. So, do we have tweets from the future? All right. Just to check and see. Well, I think just wanted to see if we have some coming in, just to spark. We're going to come back to these at the very end. Here's one: 80% of the world's predictable hazards now have financing pre-agreed and put in place. All right. Welcome to hashtag welcome to 2025, where all disasters are anticipated and lives and livelihoods saved through anticipatory action. All right. Displaced women lead way as climate hazards managed by their good governance and inclusive data management. That's what we want to hear. All right. So carrying on, we've got another video. Progress in the early action agenda comes from collective advocacy. And we have a video here from the Anticipatory Action Task Force. It's a group of some of the humanitarian actors from within the REAP partnership, highlighting their key asks when it comes to anticipatory action.
Extreme weather events are causing destruction more frequently and severely than ever before. Storms, floods, heat waves, diseases, and other types of hazards affect millions of people every year. Crises around the world are intersecting and compounding each other, increasing the risk of conflict, displacement, and hunger. The poorest and most vulnerable are hit hardest, adding to record levels of humanitarian needs in decades. By forecasting when hazards will strike, analyzing their risks, agreeing on actions, and enabling financing ahead of time, humanitarian organizations and communities can act before disasters hit. This way, anticipatory action saves lives and livelihoods and ultimately preserves people's self-sufficiency. It's a faster, more efficient, and more dignified way to protect people against predictable crisis. We want to shift the humanitarian system to be more proactive instead of reactive. But for anticipatory action to reach more people, cover more locations, address more types of hazards, and create lasting impacts in the lives of the most vulnerable, more can and must be done. But what will it take? First, when a crisis is imminent, every second counts. Because of that, we have to invest in early warning and readiness to anticipate, especially at the local level. Second, fast help also requires fast and pre-arranged funding. That is why we need to expand flexible, predictable, and coordinated financing. Third, different events in the world increase the risk of disasters. This reality calls for the application of anticipatory action to a wider range of hazards. Fourth, we must find the appropriate solutions for each challenge. This is only possible through exchange, collective learning, coordination, and partnerships all around the world. Fifth, for anticipatory action to become business as usual, it must become an integral part of national disaster management systems. These recommendations reflect our years of experience in more than 60 countries as the Anticipatory Action Task Force. We are formed by 5 organizations: IFRC, FAO, WFP, OCHA, and START Network. Let's make humanitarian assistance faster, more efficient, and dignified by acting early on predictable crises.
Okay, for REAP to achieve its ambitious goals by 2025, action needs to be taken right now, and an ever-growing network of local and global champions are doing that right now. The network is growing, and it has some really ambitious commitments from a number of its members, and we're going to hear from some of those commitments right now. Are we starting with Finland? Okay, we have a video from Finland.
Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, science is clear. Climate change is accelerating and extreme weather events are getting stronger and more frequent on every continent. There is an urgent need to build resilience to protect lives and livelihoods. This is especially the case in the least developed countries and small island developing states that suffer most from the consequences of climate change. Aligned with the goals of the Paris Agreement, Finland is committed to scale up climate finance. We aim for a balanced distribution of funding between adaptation and mitigation. Meteorological cooperation is one of the priorities of Finland's development cooperation and an important part of our adaptation finance package. Therefore, I'm delighted to announce that Finland is allocating 30 million euros to develop and implement projects to enhance weather and climate services in our partner countries. Early warning systems are an essential part of these projects. Combined with early action, they allow communities to act and protect themselves in time. They can prevent hazards turning into disasters. With our contribution, Finland wants to offer high-quality products and high-quality services for effective weather and climate services. We provide trusted and long-term partnerships for technical assistance, as well as a gender-responsive and inclusive approach. Colleagues, I, as a convening and board member of the Risk-Informed Early Action Partnership, Finland is eager to collaborate with you all. We are keen to find synergies and create value by working in partnership with experts from humanitarian, development and climate fields. Together we can support our partners to enhance adaptation and build the resilience of all, leaving no one behind. Together, through all joint efforts, we can achieve the goal of making 1 billion people safer from disasters by 2025 to become a reality. Thank you.
All right, it's a warm invitation to collaborate from Finland, one of the REAP partners. We next have a statement from Sweden. Is that right?
Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, today 41 million people in 43 countries stand on the brink of famine. Humanitarian needs across the globe are growing exponentially due to conflicts and climate change. More than 1 billion people live in countries with large climate threats. 11 out of 15 countries are in ongoing conflicts. Today we know that 20% of the climate-related disasters are predictable, and that 50% of them are foreseeable. And we also have a clear evidence that acting ahead of crisis saves people from food insecurity, sickness, new pandemics, forced migration, displacement, and falling deeper into poverty. So mainstreaming climate risk and acting ahead of crisis is impactful assistance and key to prevent and minimize losses and damages from climate change. Socioeconomic development gains are protected, drivers of conflicts are mitigated and even prevented, and lives and livelihoods are saved with dignity. Costs are cut before they multiply, and resilience is localized. Early action is simply the only right thing to do. The risk-informed early action partnership, bringing humanitarian, development, peace and climate stakeholders, the private sector, insurance companies, financial institutions and civil society to the same table in sharing good practices and taking operational actions ahead of crisis is truly added value going forward. Actions taken in partnership through ambitious commitments is exactly what is needed to make the shift from reactive crisis response to a comprehensive, proactive support and risk management. We need to act on a ripple and not on a flood. It is my firm belief that a coordinated and context-specific approach among different stakeholders and sectors will enable a financial architecture that is better fit to act ahead of crisis. Operationally, this is how we step up, scale up, and walk the talk of the Paris Agreement and Agenda 2030. Each and every one of us must make sure that early action and climate risk awareness is becoming a natural part in our international and national policies, budgets, and processes. Sweden is committed to lead by example. My government intends to make climate risk early action a priority and a norm. Now, thanks for your attention.
Act on a ripple, not a flood. And he said early action is the only right thing to do. Beautifully said. Next, we have a statement from USAID. Yes, Suzanne, in person now.
Thank you, Lisa. Allow me to take my masks. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, good evening, good afternoon, and good morning, depending on where you are. The U.S. government is committed to addressing climate change, including through supporting advancing and strengthening early warning systems and disaster risk reduction to reduce recurrent impacts of climate-related disasters. Last week in this platform, President Biden announced a set of ambitious targets to advance his new initiative called President's Emergency Plan for Adaptation and Resilience, or shortly PREPARE, which is very familiar to this community. PREPARE will support developing countries and communities in vulnerable situations around the world to prepare for, adapt to, and manage the impacts of climate change. Last week again, in this platform, USAID also released its draft agency climate strategy for external input. So we are looking for feedback from all of you. And early warning is a critical component of both USAID strategy as well as President's PREPARE initiative. As you can see, we are very excited to be one of the newest members of the REAP. And with that, USAID is announcing several commitments towards REAP's goal of making 1 billion people safer from disasters. That includes strengthening implementation of people-centered, multi-hazard early warning systems and community access to early warnings for early action, among other things. So we look forward to the partnership working with you to advance REAP's goal. Thank you.
Thank you from one of the newest members of REAP, and REAP really does hope to keep that membership growing, so do speak to them if you're considering. We've next got a statement from the START Network by video.
Start Ready is a new approach to humanitarian aid. It's a new financial service which helps communities to get ahead of escalating climate risk. These communities are supported to analyze crisis risk ahead of time, develop plans, and access pre-arranged disaster risk finance to put their plans into action when a crisis emerges.
The UK has committed £1 million to Start Ready to help organisations deliver earlier and more effective humanitarian action across up to 8 countries, protecting more lives and livelihoods from climate-related emergencies.
The climate crisis is also a humanitarian crisis. Vulnerable children, families, and communities are already feeling its impact. But by acting now, we can help communities to be prepared. That's why the EWEA Foundation is supporting Start Ready. This program will scale up locally led disaster risk financing systems and help organizations take steps to prevent climate risk in up to 8 countries.
Great. And finally, from the UK, we have Vijay Rangarajan, Director General of the Americas and Overseas Territories.
Great, thank you, Lisa, and thank you for brilliantly chairing what's been an incredibly rich discussion. So there's been a lot of this debate over today, Adaptation, Loss and Damage Day, but I think REAP is one of the really key tools, organizations, bodies who are managing to make real things happen in the real world on all of this. We, with Finland, Bangladesh, obviously, were part of the original REAP. It's great to have new measures, new members. And basically my message, and I'll be very brief, is we're going to continue strongly supporting it. Very much in the Secretariat, very much in the kind of ongoing development of all this work. How do we make this really work? The particular areas I think we're going to focus on is the data. So we're giving 33 million to the Met Office to continue the early warning systems. I think you saw some of the examples of this in Lake Victoria, the Fisher people and the Dar es Salaam examples on the screen. Very strong support for CRUISE, the climate risk and early warning systems with the WMO, and that'll continue. We think START is fantastic. I've given 10 million and we'll definitely lean in heavily on the START Ready, which you just heard about and is going to be really exciting. And we have been doing some particular targeted financing and programs in areas of the world. So 19.5 million for the Sahel and 40 million towards CLARE, which is focused on Africa, and that's climate adaptation and resilience research. There's lots more to come, but really thank you all. That's been fascinating. I'd like to leave one further thought. I think the point which I think Mr. Tembo made earlier on, which was people don't necessarily always react, even when they're given the early warning, has come out loud and clear in many of the issues today. I heard it first today, rather early, at a BBC breakfast on the work that they were doing on communications. And I think I'm taken away from this one major thought, which is REAP and the media world, communications world, could strengthen significantly by getting even closer as to how we do the communication. I think, as our Red Cross colleague said, in the right language at the right time, and really getting the power of communications to make sure that when we give early warning, that people know what to do and how to really react. But thank you very much indeed.
Thank you very much. We're going to do one last check-in on the tweets. See how you're envisaging the future. We've got one here. Communities are no longer the last mile. They are more than the first mile. They are the first adapters and are first at the table co-designing early warning systems, products, and first at the table identifying thresholds for early warnings and parametric triggers. All right. Fantastic, great ideas, and a very long headline that I would love to work with you on. in the future. And in 2025, we'll get that right together. Fantastic. You've been really, really attentive through the whole session. Thank you. And to wrap this up, we have a terribly exciting finale. We have Emi Mahmood, poet, and she's going to close today's discussion. She is world champion poet and UNHCR Goodwill Ambassador. Emi, the floor is yours.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for having me. And, you know, as you said, my name is, can you hear me? You can hear me fine? Right. My name is Imtithal. I'm called Emi. I was born in Sudan, grew up in the US. And although I'm going to be presenting poetry today, my training is actually in anthropology and molecular cellular developmental biology. I graduated from Yale a couple years ago with a certificate in global health and a Bachelor of Science in MCDB. And even though I am a scientist and I really, really believe in the facts and have my entire life, it's all I've ever known, I do believe that when you reach people where they least expect to be reached, that's where change can actually be made and can be catalyzed. I loved everything that you guys were saying, and you know, I couldn't stop thinking in my head when you were saying that, you know, there's an issue of communication. It isn't only an issue of communication. In the end, it can be a disconnect if you don't have the most vulnerable people, the people who are most affected, involved in every level, from the planning phases to implementation to every other stage. And that's what I've experienced as an advocate and working with refugees and just working on the ground as a field worker and things like that. And I'm a former refugee myself, and what I can say is that the people who make the decisions are seldom those who have to live with the consequences. And so if you have people invested in their own future from the very beginning, they are much more likely to follow through. And that's you know, something I learned really, really early on. And I hope that that's what people will take away from COP and from hearing this poem, which I composed after meeting with a lot of different refugees on the ground, and also just, you know, virtually and in other ways. The idea is just to help foster and facilitate the inclusion of marginalized voices and vulnerable voices in these spaces. Because in the end, if we don't bring those voices ourselves, you know, these spaces don't intuitively include people like us and people who aren't necessarily speaking at the same level. I love that, you know, we have a meeting of minds here and we have all of these different partners in different countries and things, but in the end, when a flood comes, it doesn't matter how many countries, you know, are involved. It doesn't matter how big your endowment is or how many PhDs you have or what country you run. What matters is how fast you can swim. And I know it sounds very morbid, but the reality is, if in a climate crisis we are equals, then we should also be having a conversation as equals when we're coming up with solutions for the future. And that's what I want to say. So here is the poem, and I hope that it helps to just drive that point home. Next time you're sitting down to start planning, look around you and ask yourself, is everyone who needs to be here right now? And if they're not, use that same innovative mindset you're using for the future to bring them into that discussion. Yes, on their own terms and not on the parameters that we set for them. Okay. Thank you. All right, here goes. This poem is called Di Baledna, which means this is our home. And, oh, sorry, I forgot to say one more thing. The village that my dad was born in does not exist anymore. And it was a combination of conflict and climate change, and they always go hand in hand. And so for me, when I'm at this conference, I hear a lot of abstractions like extinction and participation and things like that. And for me, bringing it back home to lived experience is the most important thing. When we say participation, we mean collaboration. And when we say extinction, we mean we've almost experienced something like that. So I hope you guys are encouraged and inspired. This poem is called Di Baledna, and it means this is our home. If you are reading this, I forgive you. You have grown far from the heart of me, my child. Have lost the familiar love we held for one another in your first years of life. When you were young, you marveled at the plants and critters that ran across my bosom. You worshipped the water, swam up and down my rivers. You drank from my rain, laughed at each first snow, begged for sun on the cloudy days. You didn't hesitate to sink your fingers into the mud of me and tickle loose little droplets, seedlings, and worms. How you built a refuge for every wayward wanderer, lining the kitchen shelves and jars of butterflies and lightning bugs. You drank the breeze from my trees, the honey, sap, gum with joy and ease. How you came to me to rest your head at my tender hearth, your weary body in my pockets. You loved me. You nurtured me before you knew what it was to nurture, tended me before you knew what it was to tend. Tiller, sower, farmer, green-thumbed little one, you knew me. Lately, you hurt me. You break and cut and tear into me, and I forgive you. For I am a part of you, like your brothers and sisters before you and those who are close to me now, so I forgive you. I forgive you again for the sowing you do for the reaping you do with no intention to sow. I forgive you again for the waste and greed and gluttony when you were young. You asked me why they do this. Once brothers and sisters, now staining the earth with the blood of your people, tearing apart the branches of your family tree. You losing ground and hope all in one fell swoop. You turned to me. Resting beneath the shade of date palms and magnolias, you begged me to make sense of it all. All I could offer you then was a promise that wherever you would go, you would find me. But lately, there isn't much left for me to promise. They dug pits into my sides, have stolen the rubies, gold, and diamonds Maya placed in my thighs. I do all I can to heal, but my weary body won't clear away the hurt so easily. My waters rush and do not soothe. The air in my lungs suffocates the little ones. I cough and spew and gush and bruise, and it will not heal. When a child of mine dies by my hands, here, in the long forgotten valleys of your youth, visitors come not of their own accord, but by necessity, and I am made whole again. Abdul Ghani and Izzahara sink their hands into the mud of me. Saplings cling, and I am whole again. Hatim builds monuments to my skies, captures the sun, channels the lightning, and I am whole again. Luca and Layatu surround their home in fruit born of me. The children eat and grow and are healthy, and I am whole again. Usman protests. It isn't mine alone to mend, he says. I need you to build and build again, to make new, to bring forth life from relentless earth, making an oasis of charred terrain, building a refuge out of nothing but scar tissue and lightning strikes. Let me be more to you than just a final resting place. Let me do more for you than call you home, child of mine. If you are reading this, I need you, your mother. If this land could speak, would she thank us, praise us? Would she ridicule us or beg us? Would her voice be weary, gentle, disdainful? Would it shake with sorrow, with rage? I used to wonder at these things all of the time. At 11 years old, I watched my neighbor's house crumble before my eyes. The floodwaters washed away the earth and clay most people used to build their homes. To see her wade through her home like that, to watch her try and salvage all that she had left. Our country was already locked in turmoil, and now the earth began to purge us too. If you could stop the next tornado from hitting your house, the next hurricane from wiping out your city, the next drought from starving your people, the next lightning strike from ending your life, wouldn't you? The locusts in the Horn of Africa, the floods in South Sudan, the ice in Chicago, the fires in California, Australia, the threat of rain that won't stop or rest that won't come. We are at the precipice of possible change, a turning point that can and will define us. Fire or ice, how will the world end? I don't know, but I don't want to find out. Not in our generation, and not in the next. Thank you. We're counting on you.
That was absolutely beautiful, Emmy. And I think humans need beauty as much as they need food, water, shelter, safety, and information. So thank you. I think right now we all need a break. Thank you very much for coming. That's it. Have a good evening.